Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Justice League Dark: Apokolips War. Now, this is an animated superhero film released straight to DVD and Blu-ray in 2020, and this of course is based on characters created and owned by DC Comics, such as Batman, originally created by Bob Kane Bill Finger, Superman, originally created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, Constantine, originally created by Allan, Bissette, and Totleben, and so many other characters that I would be here forever if I listed off all the characters that are in this. Now, I'm doing this review as part of my yearly series of Batman reviews, but I had initially planned on reviewing this along with my Superman reviews, because technically, Superman does have a much bigger part to play in this than Batman. Actually, Batman's not really in the movie that much. Honestly, I would say Superman and Constantine are really the two principal protagonists of this movie. At the same time, Batman does have an important role in the story too, so I guess you could count it as a Batman movie too, but technically, it probably would have been more appropriate to review this along with my Superman reviews. Now, for almost 20 years now, DC and Warner Brothers has been doing a series of straight-to-video animated films, the majority of which are standalone, especially the ones that are based on some of the big graphic novels or story arcs like Dark Knight Returns, Year One, The Killing Joke, The Long Halloween. This isn't Batman-related, but I know they recently did a two-part Watchmen movie, but there actually are a select few of these DC animated films that actually are in continuity with each other. From what I can gather, this particular continuity started with the 2013 film Justice League Flashpoint Paradox, which of course was based on the Geoff Johns comic. And I know the 2014 animated Batman film Son of Batman, along with its two sequels, Batman vs. Robin and Batman Bad Blood, are also set within this continuity, all three of which I've reviewed in the past. So is the 2018 film Justice League Dark, which I also reviewed a few years ago. Now, full disclosure, I have not seen all the films of this animated DC universe, but I know this movie sort of closes out this particular continuity, but I would argue that you could still view this as a standalone film because I watched this and I really wasn't confused by anything. Now, this movie takes elements from the comic book storyline Darkseid War by Geoff Johns, as well as the Final Crisis storyline by Grant Morrison, as well as the New 52 storyline Future's End. So, the plot of Apokolips War is the Justice League finds evidence that Darkseid is planning a massive invasion of Earth, which he had attempted before in the past, which I believe is covered in some of the other animated Justice League movies. So, they decide that they're going to take the battle to Apokolips, which is Darkseid's home planet. Little do they know that it was basically a trap all along, and Darkseid's forces end up killing half the Justice League, and then they end up taking over the Earth. We jump ahead to 2 years later, and basically, human civilization as we know it has completely collapsed, and whatever is left of humanity is being enslaved by Darkseid's forces. And Superman has actually been tattooed with liquid kryptonite, basically rendering him powerless. And Batman has basically been brainwashed by Darkseid and is now essentially Darkseid's right-hand man. So now Superman, along with Raven from the Teen Titans, who is a very powerful sorceress and is the daughter of a demon called Trigon, they're the only ones who are trying to save what's left of the world. So Raven and Superman track down Constantine, a sorcerer and demon hunter who blames Superman for what happened to the world and blames Superman for the death of Satana, another powerful magician that Constantine was in a romantic relationship with. They eventually convince Constantine, as well as Edrican the Demon, who has really become Constantine's only friend in these last 2 years. They convince them to help them, and eventually they track down Damian Wayne, who is Bruce Wayne's son, which you'll understand more if you saw Son of Batman. And things become a lot more urgent when Darkseid starts harvesting magma from the Earth's core, which will completely destroy the planet and wipe out what's left of the human race. We also learn that Lois Lane has joined forces with the Suicide Squad, and now they must all work together to end Darkseid's reign of terror once and for all. Meanwhile, Raven is being tormented by her demotic father, who is trapped in hell and is desperately trying to break free, and if he does, he could potentially be an even greater threat than Darkseid. So, Apokolips War I thought was a lot of fun. If you're a DC Comics fan, I definitely recommend this, but I will warn you though, this gets really, really dark and ultra-violent. This is definitely not for kids. Like, don't be thinking, oh, my kids like superheroes, I'll sit them down in front of this. Oh no, this... Like I said, this is ultra-violent. You see characters getting ripped apart, you see them getting their faces eaten off, and you see characters just die horrifically in this. The movie's R-rated, and I actually think it earns its R rating. Unlike a lot of the other DC animated films, which are also rated R, a lot of those honestly could have been more like hard PG-13s, but this definitely earns its rating. Although I gotta say, if this came out when I was a kid, I probably would have loved it, but I gotta be somewhat responsible here and say, yeah, if you have kids, you might want to view this first before you let them watch it. Now, in the film, Superman is voiced by Jerry O'Connell, who I would say did a pretty good job in this, and I like how in this Superman is basically mortal. He's basically human. Like, he's completely powerless and he has to rely on his allies and rely more on the brain rather than the brawn. And in the movie, Superman does blame himself for what happened to his friends and to the rest of the world, and a lot of the movie is about Superman seeking redemption and forgiveness for his failures. I thought that was cool because you don't normally see a flawed Superman. In the movie, Matt Ryan plays the voice of Constantine. He also voiced Constantine in Justice League Dark, and he actually played the live-action version of this character in the short-lived NBC series Constantine, as well as on DC's Legends of Tomorrow. Now, this character was also played by Keanu Reeves in the 2005 film Constantine, albeit that is a very different version of the character. That's still a great movie on its own, but it is a very different interpretation of this character. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this character, he first appeared as a reoccurring character in Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing, but eventually got his own spin-off series, Hellblazer. And I am a fan of this character, so it was cool seeing him as essentially the secondary protagonist of the film. You also have Taissa Farmiga as the voice of Raven, and I really liked Raven's story arc in this movie. From what I understand, it is sort of continued from some of the Teen Titans movies that are in continuity with this. And she is presented as a very complex and tragic character. You also have Stuart Allan as the voice of Damian Wayne, and you have Jason O'Mara as the voice of Batman. He also voiced Batman in several of the other DC animated films that are part of this continuity. And it was interesting seeing Batman as an antagonist, which we've seen before in like some of the Elseworlds comics, but it was done really well here, and there is a really emotional moment between Batman and Damian Wayne towards the end of the film. You also have John DiMaggio as the voice of King Shark and the voice of Trigon. I do want to point out King Shark. There's a scene in this movie where it's heavily implied that King Shark and Constantine were in a relationship at one point, because Constantine is actually bisexual. The issue is King Shark is also a human-shark hybrid, so it's like, what the fuck is Constantine into? And then you have the late great Tony Todd as the voice of Darkseid. Horror fans would recognize him from Candyman, The Crow, the Final Destination movies, as well as the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead. Outside of the horror genre, he also played Worf's brother in Star Trek The Next Generation. He also played one of the main villains in Michael Bay's The Rock. He's also shown up in movies like Oliver Stone's Platoon, Colors, Lean on Me. He was a very underrated actor. I actually met him twice, and he unfortunately passed away a few months ago. But he does a great job as the voice of Darkseid in this. Admittedly, I do tend to associate Michael Ironside's voice with this character more. Michael Ironside voiced Darkseid in the animated Justice League series from the early 2000s. And for me, that's the voice I think of when I think of this character, but still, Tony Todd is excellent as this character in this movie. And Darkseid is legitimately a pretty scary character. Like, he's essentially a god, and he's basically tyranny incarnate. Now, this is kind of a spoiler, but by the end of the movie, they end up freeing Trigon from hell, and there's a pretty epic battle between Trigon and Darkseid, and it seems that Darkseid finally meets his match with Trigon. So yeah, I recommend Justice League Dark Apokolips War. I think it's a really fun movie. The only thing I didn't care for so much was the ending. I honestly found the ending to be a bit of a cop-out, but I also understand why they did it. Alright, so big spoiler if you haven't seen this movie, but if you're familiar with The Flash, basically if The Flash goes fast enough, he could actually go backwards in time, or even reset the timeline. That's basically what happened during the whole Flashpoint Paradox storyline. That was also essentially the plot of the live-action Flash movie. And basically, Constantine convinces Flash to do this to undo what happened. And I wasn't crazy about that. I understand that shit happens in the comics all the time. Like, whenever there's some big world-changing or world-ending event in the DC universe, they typically have, like, a built-in reset button with either the Flash or some kind of cosmic being that can control time and reset everything. And I'm not a fan of that plot device. I understand why DC does it, but to me it kind of sacrifices storytelling, because that means any sort of arc that we see these characters go on, or whenever a character dies, really none of that has any weight anymore, because, oh, we'll just reset things and we'll reset the timeline. So again, I know the comics do it all the time. I understand why they do it, I'm just not a fan of that. But besides the ending, I did like this movie quite a bit, and I do recommend it if you're a fan of DC Comics, and especially if you're a fan of darker interpretations of these characters. So yeah, that was my review of Justice League Dark Apokolips War, and bye.